All right, let's talk about the absolute pinnacle of stealth and power. You can't see it, you can't hear it, but believe me, it is one of the most complex, most incredible vehicles ever built by humankind.
So I want you to just try and wrap your head around this. This machine, it can stay completely submerged, deep beneath the ocean waves for up to 6 months at a time. It's basically a self-contained world, just gliding silently through the abyss.
And if that wasn't enough, get this. It can operate for a full 20 years without ever needing to refuel. Not once. Yeah, we're definitely going to get into how that's even possible a little later on. But for now, just think about it. That kind of endurance makes it a true ghost in the water.
You know, some people have called this thing the most lethal weapon ever designed. And that's not just some empty boast. It's been called an apocalypse machine. And for good reason. It's capable of wiping out entire continents, all while staying completely invisible. So the big question is, how on earth did we get here? I mean, how did we go from what was basically a glorified diving bell to this, the ultimate predator? Well, it's a story that unfolds over 200 years of brilliant and sometimes really dangerous engineering. So let's dive in and see how it all happened. And to do that, we have to go all the way back, to the beginning, to the world's very first military submarine. And this thing, it faced two huge fundamental problems. One, how do you breathe? And two, how do you steer?
So our story is going to follow 6 key vessels. We're starting with the Turtle, all the way back in 1776, and we're going to end up with the USS Pennsylvania of today. Now, each one of these represents a massive leap forward in technology. Each one solved a seemingly impossible problem, making submarines bigger, stealthier, and a whole lot deadlier. Think of this as our roadmap.
Okay, let's tackle that first big hurdle, air. I mean, it sounds simple, but back in 1776, the operator of the Turtle had maybe 25 minutes before his brain, starved of oxygen, would just start to shut down. Now, fast forward to today's USS Pennsylvania. It keeps a crew of 165 people breathing just fine for months on end. So, how do they do it?
Well, the answer is both super simple and absolutely genius. They make their own air, right out of seawater. They use a process called electrolysis. Basically, they zap the water with electricity, and that splits the H2O into hydrogen and, you guessed it, breathable oxygen. They literally breathe the ocean.
And here's a fun little tidbit for you. The crew on the Pennsylvania, they actually have a nickname for their oxygen generators. They call them Paris and Nikki. Yep, after the Hilton sisters. And these machines are no joke. They churn out over 4,000 liters of pure, fresh oxygen every single hour. Crazy, right?
Okay, so problem 1, air, is solved. But now, how do you steer this thing? For that, we're going to jump ahead to the H.L. Huntley. Its designers, well, they looked to nature for inspiration. They basically copied the fins of a fish and used simple levers to control them. Today, though, the Pennsylvania uses these electronically controlled wings, they called them planes, that let it fly through the water with just incredible precision. But you know, the Huntley had one major flaw. Even with its new maneuverability, its main weapon was basically a bomb on a stick. It was called a spar torpedo, and to use it, the sub had to physically ram its target. As you can probably guess, that was not exactly safe.
So the real solution to that problem came during World War II with the German U-boats. They developed the electric torpedo. See, older torpedoes ran on compressed air, and they left this big, obvious trail of bubbles right back to the sub. Not very stealthy. The electric ones, no bubbles. The trade-off, though, was that the batteries were absolutely massive, so you needed a huge submarine just to carry them and the torpedoes.
Now, let's jump forward to today. The torpedoes on the Pennsylvania, well, they're basically high-tech guided robots. An officer can literally steer one with a hair-thin fiber optic cable, like playing a video game, and then its own onboard sensors take over for the final hit. We're talking about a true smart weapon here.
All right, so let's recap. We've got air, we've got control, and we've got a long-range weapon. But those U-boats, they still had a huge problem. They were thirsty. Their diesel engines guzzled fuel, and that meant they had to refuel at sea from these other subs called milk cows. That was basically a death sentence, because it meant sitting on the surface, totally exposed, for hours on end.
The next giant leap, the one that solved this problem, came from the atomic age. In 1954, the USS Nautilus absolutely changed the game. It was powered by a nuclear reactor.
In simple terms, it used the insane amount of heat from splitting atoms to boil water, create steam, and turn turbines. The result? Near limitless power.
And just to put that leap into perspective for you, a World War II U-boat ran on diesel. The Pennsylvania, it's powered by a lump of uranium about the size of your fist. And listen to this, it has not been refueled since it was launched in 1989. The only thing that forces it to come home is running out of food for the crew. So the Nautilus had endless power, which was incredible, but its firepower was still just regular old torpedoes. And with the Cold War heating up, that wasn't enough. The world powers needed something more. They needed a way to launch a nuclear missile from deep underwater, completely hidden from sight.
But wait, how do you even do that? You can't just light a rocket engine underwater, it won't work. Well, the solution they came up with was pure genius. Here's how it works. First, the missile sits inside a dry tube, sealed off from the water. Then, a massive burst of compressed air acts like a cannon, shooting the missile upwards. It has just enough oomph to punch through the surface. And only then, once it's in the open air, do the rocket engines fire up.
The first boat to really perfect this was the USS George Washington, and it carried 16 missiles. But today, the USS Pennsylvania carries 24 Trident nuclear missiles. And get this, each one of those missiles has more destructive power than all the bombs dropped in World War I and World War II combined.
And that brings us right back to our ultimate predator, the Pennsylvania. So now it has air, it has near limitless power, and it has unbelievable firepower. But all of that is completely useless if the enemy can hear you coming. So the final, and maybe the toughest challenge, was making a 17,000-ton machine completely silent. The biggest enemy of silence for a sub is something called cavitation. It's a really weird phenomenon. If you spin a propeller fast enough, the pressure around the blades drops so low that the water around it actually starts to boil. Not from heat, but just from the lack of pressure. And as those millions of tiny steam bubbles form and then pop, they create a ton of noise.
So what's the solution? Well, it's a highly classified, specially shaped propeller. The exact design is a secret, but we know the principle. It's engineered to generate enormous thrust, but at really low speeds, slow enough that cavitation just doesn't happen. And that is the secret to becoming a true silent predator.
And so there you have it. That's the journey. In a little over 200 years, we went from a hand-cranked wooden sphere with about 25 minutes of air to a silent, nuclear-powered fortress that can stay hidden for months on end, ready to unleash just unimaginable power at a moment's notice. When you look back, the evolution of the submarine has just been this relentless quest to solve one impossible problem after another. They've conquered depth, they've conquered endurance, and they've conquered sound, which really just leaves you wondering, what's next? What could possibly be the next frontier for this incredible machine?